Welcome to the third episode of Rare Graphics Cards. Today we're going to take a look at a very sought after card for those few collectors that are aware of its existence. This card is none other than the VideoLogic Neon 250, which is the predecessor to the famous Cairo cards, and it supports the final chipset supporting the PowerSGL API. As always, we'll start with a little bit of history. The Neon 250 uses the company's second generation PowerVR engine. The first generation cards were the add-on accelerators PCX1 and PCX2, which were released in 1996 and 1997 accordingly. Both had only 4 MB of memory, and the lack of a VGA core meant that they worked similarly to 3DFX Voodoo 1 and Voodoo 2 cards. We already tested a PCX2 card in the first episode, so check it out if you want to know more about its performance, as well as the company history. PowerVR Series 2 was first announced publicly at CeBIT in 1998, and VideoLogic actually scored a contract for providing the 3D chip for Sega's then upcoming Dreamcast console in 1997, using this very technology. The Dreamcast was released in late 1998 in Japan, but lost in the console war against Sony's PlayStation 2, Nintendo's GameCube, and Microsoft's Xbox. The Neon itself was supposed to be on the market by late 1998, but the company was so preoccupied with the Dreamcast chip that the desktop card had to be delayed until next year. As such, the desktop PC version of the chip was announced at CeBIT in March 1999 with just 16 MB of memory. Cards started shipping in August, luckily for customers with double the memory size, so 32 MB of SD-RAM memory were present on board. With its $169 price tag, VideoLogic aimed the card at the mainstream segment of the market, hoping to really bring the fight to 3DFX's Voodoo 3 and Nvidia's Riva TNT 2. Sadly for the Neon 250, other companies already had third-generation cards on the market. The Neon was a bit outdated at the time of release, with support only for AGP 2X, 1 pixel per clock, and lower clocks compared to the competition. The 64-bit wide memory bus was another thing that degraded performance, along with the smaller 4 million polygons per second rate. The very efficient PowerVR engine, which removed hidden objects and surfaces from the rendering process, was supposed to overcome these hardware limitations. But it relied on driver support, which was far from perfect. Some reviewers noticed flashing textures, and one of them even called the card dead on arrival. For most gamers, VideoLogic was a relative unknown, despite the PCX2 achieving some success, and as such it didn't have a great chance at big sales, with strong competitors showing new and exciting technologies, and products like the dual-core ATI Rage Fury Max, the Matrox G400 with its environmental bump mapping, and Nvidia's GeForce 256 with full support for DirectX 7 thanks to its hardware TNL. VideoLogic very soon ended driver development and instead focused on the development of a new chip named Cairo. The Neon 250 was forgotten almost as fast as it had appeared, with only a few enthusiasts knowing about this rare card's existence and even fewer of them owning a working card. That's as far as history goes. Now let's check some high-intensity gaming as the box proclaims. The Neon 250 will be compared to an Nvidia Riva TNT 2 Pro. VideoLogic's card is clearly losing on all fronts. Memory and core clocks are lower, memory bus width is halved, and the HB bus support is outdated. But worst of all is a single pipeline with a single texture per clock that heavily reduces fill rate and texel rate. DirectX support is equal on both cards, and the Neon 250 can also use the PowerSGL API, which was developed for the previous generation PCX1 and PCX2 cards. More than 40 games were supported, but by the time of the Neon's release, this API had become outdated, and no one was interested in using it for new titles. Sadly, the Neon offers no OpenGL support, which is surprising for a card from late 1999. Instead, it relies on mini-GL drivers, which became popular with earlier cards, such as the Voodoo 1, due to the lack of a full OpenGL ICD. Driver options are rich compared to many of its rivals. Specifically, the Direct3D tab is full of interesting settings. On the other hand, the PowerSGL and mini-GL tabs are mostly empty. The multitude of settings on offer may be great, but the driver itself isn't perfect. We had to install patch 393 to make the Neon 250 work on a Pentium 3 1 GHz, a CPU from the following year, which was clearly something the developers hadn't taken into consideration. 3D Mark shows acceptable effects quality with one small exception. The clouds in the first test are too bright. They sort of look like an early implementation of the HDR feature that became popular much later. Compared to the TNT2, the card is producing roughly around 30 frames per second less. The results browser shows a similar score to the Trident Blade XP, with a quite low texel rate. Trilinear texture filtering eats away a sizable 26% of performance. The Neon also supports anisotropic filtering, but it's pretty useless due to the gigantic 76.5% slowdown compared to bilinear filtering. Incoming's looking good, but the Neon is 3 times slower than the Riva TNT2, and the 800x600 resolution is a little too close to the playability cutoff point of 30 FPS, sometimes going even lower than 20. GLQuake needs a mini GL driver installed and is definitely playable. The Riva is far ahead with twice the frames per second. Fraps doesn't work with a mini GL driver, so the video footage is missing an FPS counter. Instead, you can enjoy the PowerVR logo that can be enabled in the driver options for PowerSGL games. Quake 3 in 32-bit color and with trilinear texture filtering enabled is just too much for the Neon. Switching to bilinear filtering, however, does provide us with a much better frame rate. Half-Life using a mini-GL driver looks fine and is playable, but again the Fraps FPS counter doesn't work. So, we compared the mini-GL version with a direct 3D renderer, which works too but shows flashing wall textures. Similar issues were reported by reviewers for other games utilizing direct 3D as well.
Current topside temperature is 93 degrees, with an estimated high of 105. The Black Mesa compound is maintained at a pleasant 68 degrees at all times. This train is inbound from Level 3 dormitories to Sector C test labs and control facilities. If your intended destination is a high security area beyond Sector C, you will need to return to the central transit hub in Area 9.
Expendable is one of the few exceptions where the Neon beat the TNT-2. The drivers must be heavily optimized for this game. Notice that the Fraps FPS counter went completely crazy on the Neon side. Unreal is another game where the Neon proves to be faster, but that's only using the PowerSGL API. The direct 3D renderer is much slower. The TNT-2 maintains a solid lead in the Unreal Tournament demo by almost 20 frames per second, but the game is definitely playable on the Neon 250.
Killing spree.
Aliens vs Predator is hard in both cards, and as such, their performance is practically the same.
Warning, intruder.
Unit 2, report in. Report in, Unit 2. Unit 2, report in. This car must be down.
So, it's time for the conclusion. The Neon 250's strongest appeal is support for PowerSGL games. This alone makes it highly regarded among retro Power VR fans. It's also good enough for older games all the way up to the date of its release. And of course, for those who want a piece of unique hardware in their retro setup, the Neon 250's lure is pretty strong. On the weak side of things is the quite low fill rate, which doesn't really allow for playable frame rates in later games. This disadvantage means that the card is suitable only for period-correct PCs. Driver development ended very soon, probably by late 1999, and this can again be a problem for newer titles. The card also lacks OpenGL support, but thankfully the usage of a mini-GL driver works fairly well for most well-known titles. The biggest problem, however, is availability and price. Right now, there's not a single card on eBay, and you'll have to wait sometimes quite a long while before even one will appear, usually at a very prohibitive price. We award the VideoLogic Neon 250 with 8 stars out of 10 for quite good performance in older games and support for a unique API which had relative success. That's all for today. For the rest of this video, we have a few performance comparisons between the PCX2 and the Neon 250 in PowerSGL titles, so that should be pretty cool for PowerSGL fans. Thanks for watching.
Ugh.